There are things you can't outrun. You can't outrun the pestilence. Those who tried found they'd brought it with them, its dark shadow lurking at the bottom of every well, between the fibres of their travelling cloaks, even at the back of their lovers' throats. And you can't outrun yourself, which is often a plague of a different kind. Julian didn't know this when he set out from home. He was in that middling place, not quite a man, but no longer a boy. His face was still smooth and childlike, but he had grown tall over the summer, tall enough for his father to present him with his own hunting bow. It was of beautiful workmanship, but as Julian took it in his hands, tears spattered the wood. If I'm strong enough to carry a bow, I'm strong enough to leave home, for who knows what crime my strength may drive me to commit, he asked his parents. He knew the answer. All three of them did. The night before Julian's birth, his father had woken in the grip of dread. His wife's bed seemed to be surrounded by malevolent shapes, each with its own terrible power. His tongue had cleaved to the roof of his mouth, and his back was drenched in sweat. He couldn't move, only watch as these malign attendants cast spells on his wife's swollen belly. "Sour news we have for you. You'll die at your child's own hand." And then the nighttime visitors were gone as quickly as they'd come, leaving a frantic man to shake his wife awake. "My love, you've been dreaming," the mother-to-be protested, stroking her husband's face with one hand and kneading sleep from her eyes with the other. "'Tis but a nightmare. You'll feel right again when the sun's fairly up." But her husband was insistent, recounting again and again what he'd seen, until his wife said to soothe him, "A babe in arms can do no harm to anyone. Let's wait and see what sort of man this child grows to be. There'll be time to send him away if we see danger." So Julian was born and made master of the lavish nursery that his parents had prepared. At first his father tensed with every sudden sound from the cradle, but as the days passed, so too did his suspicions. For who could find anything but delight in Julian? His whole face shone, his hands were always outstretched in curious play, and he loved nothing better than to be swung up on his father's shoulders and borne above the world. As an only child, he was the adored centre of a benevolent universe. Until his 14th birthday drew near. "A bow!" he exclaimed when his mother asked what he most wanted. "My very own bow, that I may follow the hunt." His mother's face crumpled and she sank to her heels. "My son, you don't know what you're asking for." And so Julian learned of his father's vision. The thought of it ate away at him day and night. He could feel himself growing stronger, and his own strength terrified him. "I must get away," he thought, "far away, where I can cause no harm." So he set out for a far distant town, leaving his parents with a passionate embrace and no forwarding address. He took with him his horse, a purse of gold coins, and the hunting bow. Many years passed. Julian was happy enough in his own home, although the ache below his breastbone never quite abated. It was sharpest on his wedding day, when his wife arrived at church flanked with family and friends, and he entered alone. But he pushed the memory of his parents' faces away and hoped that somehow they knew he had found satisfaction, if not joy. But they didn't know, and the pain of all those unknowns eventually drove Julian's father to say it were folly to send him away for a foolish dream, the product of brains addled in sleep. Let us go and find the boy. So they set out, enquiring for Julian at all the turnpikes and taverns, until they met a woman who took pity on their exhaustion. For Jesus' love, You may rest a while in my home. My husband is away on the hunt. You may have our room." The grateful couple collapsed beneath the quilt, but they were never to wake. That night, Julian, returning home from the hunt early and thinking to surprise his wife, froze on the threshold. He saw his wife's tumble of dark hair on the counterpane, flowing over a stranger's bare arm. "I have lost my parents. Am I now to lose my wife's love and fidelity too?" And in his anger and bitter despair, he loosed 2 arrows and stumbled into the kitchen, barely knowing what he was doing. His wife sat serene by the fire. "Oh, my love, shh! There are 2 wayfarers asleep in our bed." How does one atone for this? In his grief, Julian decided he would throw his doors open to every wayfarer, especially the sick and suffering and the poor in spirit, for love of the parents who had been killed at his hand. But over time, his grief and its generous resolve began to fade. His wife had left him, driven away by fear of the jealous distrust that had prompted the murder. And the travellers who filled the rooms that had once rang with her laughter were often so coarse and so careless. "I've lost my parents. I have lost my wife. Am I allowed to let the home that I've built be torn down around my ears?" And he tried to drive them out. But one sick old man refused to leave. He clasped Julian's arms with his own calloused and scabbed hands, and Julian felt a jolt of recognition. "Do I know you? We've met!" He called to the other guests who were straggling out. "Don't leave! Please, stay!" And running to the larder to bring out what food he had left, he felt his heart crack open. "I've seen him! I've seen the Christ!" But when he turned, he found he could no longer identify that face from the throng that surrounded him. And yet, somehow the knowledge didn't leave him. I ran away from fear of loss, and I killed from fear of loss. And I am cured from that fear in giving all I have left. But there's no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear. The story of St. Julian the Hospitaller.